Hi, I'm Allison, the mom of a bunch of Malones, and I'm here talking about parenting because I love to do that. It helps me do a better job with my parenting. We've been going for 25 years now. We have 8 kids. We've homeschooled them all, and we've learned a lot. So we've done a lot of things wrong. We fixed some of them. We've learned from a lot of wise people. And at this point, I'd love to share with you anything that would be beneficial to you because, again, it's beneficial to me to go through it. So today I'm talking about the philosophy of authority. And I just love to think about this stuff. I think it's critical to really think deeply about what parenting is and what God wants it to be and what it means when he makes us an authority over our children, how to handle that, how not to handle that. So I was reading a political philosopher, and Robert Paul Wolff. He was talking really about something else, but his quote was so intriguing, and I was like stuck on it. I just loved it. He was saying, an authoritative command must be distinguished from a persuasive argument. When I am commanded to do something, I may choose to comply, even though I'm not being threatened, because I'm brought to believe that it's something which I ought to do. If that's the case, then I am not, strictly speaking, obeying a command, but rather acknowledging the force of an argument or the rightness of a prescription. My complying with his command does not constitute an acknowledgement on my part of any such authority. And this was from In Defense of Anarchism. So actually, I don't totally agree. I think this is a really important point. But in speaking about adults, I think that you're weighing two different authorities. You have to use your own responsibility and your own thought in order to compare, to make sure that you are obeying the higher authority when obeying the lower authority. But I think that you can be in submission, in obedience, by having a submissive attitude towards it. Like, yes, I will obey unless you're contradicting my higher authority. So you start out with that. But the reason I'm talking about that today is because I think it really applies to children. So I'm going to kind of meander around this. To me, this is delicious and really important. It helps me know what to do with my own kids. It gives me a place to stand when I'm making decisions with them and for them as they grow older. So I hope it does the same for you. And if not, you can just press stop because I don't want to bore you. But anyway, I think being a child, you start out, you need to just obey, like have the faith of a child, because you can't really do anything else yet. When you're a baby, like you're learning to live, like you're learning to eat and drink and sleep and whatever, mainly just drink. You don't have the rational ability to be able to think through authority and compare it to the Bible because you can't read. But as you get older and you learn a lot more, you get more and more responsibility to think through what you're being told to do. Even as you grow and become a completely independent adult, not completely, but an independent adult, you still need to think through what you're being told to do, but you can still have a submissive posture toward a legitimate authority. So that's my premise. And as I'm talking about this as an authority over my kids, I am under the authority of God, but I am over my children. So how do I hold that? How can I mess that up? What do I need to not do? What do I need to do? Those are some of my questions. This particular quote points to a really, actually a critical place. So I wrote down that this is exposing the crack that divides loving authority from child worship at the base. This is a concern that I bring up often because I believe that many good, loving parents are making this mistake. If I were a nicer person, I think I'd be more prone to this, but as it is, I've still been guilty of it. So it's not like my main weakness as a parent, but I've definitely been a part of it. And again, if I were, nicer, it would have been more of a temptation for me. But here's what I'm saying. God has assigned parents, the mother and the father, to be an authority over their children. This can be abdicated, this can be reassigned, but this is the basic structure. And in review, this is not because the parents are more important or because they're smarter. I'm not smarter than my kids. It's not because they're more valuable. It's not because they need to be worshiped. It's not any of those things at all. It's just the structure, which is most beneficial for everyone, that God made up a long time ago. Parents who talk their children into obeying rather than asking for obedience up front are not acting as authorities. They're rather acting as persuasive peers. That's my main point. Okay, so when you see, and I see this all the time, and I've seen myself do it, When a parent asks for a kid, or instead of asking, appeals to a child and then convinces the child to do what needs to be done, that's not very good parenting, is what I'm saying. Does that make sense? I think there are many times when we need to be explaining clearly. There are many times, especially as kids get older, that we need to be persuading them. Like, those can all be totally appropriate things, and they are in many scenarios. But to start out by asking or convincing rather than commanding, or at least telling, is not the right place. Now, I hesitate to use the word commanding because it sounds overbearing and prideful and super powerful, and it needs to be none of those things. But a command is just, okay, I need you to do this. Can you please go wash the dishes? Okay, good. It's time for you to go to bed now. Go get your jammies on, okay? Those are commands. I'm not saying, hey, do you think you've gotten enough sleep this week? Okay, maybe we should do you think this is a good time for bed? Well, do you feel tired? Okay, well, how much sleep do you want tonight? Okay, that would not be a command. That would be asking the kid. Yeah. So I think that's pretty obvious, but it comes in more insidious ways. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. So what does this look like? The parent directs the child to take an action or to abstain from one. The child doesn't obey in any of a variety of forms. So maybe the child ignores, or maybe he argues, or maybe he defies the command. Doesn't matter. All those are bad. He's not obeying. Here's where it goes wrong. The parent gets down on his level and tells the child why the command was a correct one, or why it would be in the child's best interest to comply. This could take a few minutes or a long time. And then finally, the child takes the action. My contention is this particular scenario is super bad parenting. You might be thinking, what? Who is this girl on the internet and what is she even talking about? That's good parenting. Yeah, it's bad parenting is what I'm saying. Totally. I know a lot of really nice people. I think especially patient people might be more prone to this, to which I can't really relate because I'm super impatient. But they feel like it's right for me to be kind, which is true. It's right for me to be patient, which is true. Therefore, I shouldn't command my child or expect them to obey. I should talk them into obeying, which is wrong. Does that make sense? Let me review that quote again one more time, because as far as children go, I would agree with this. An authoritative command must be distinguished from a persuasive argument. When I'm commanded to do something, so right now I'm the child, I may choose to comply even though I'm not being threatened, because I'm brought to believe that it is something which I ought to do. And if that is the case, then I am not, strictly speaking, obeying a command, but rather acknowledging the force of an argument or the rightness of a prescription. So I think he's right in this instance, as far as children go. If you're talking them into it, they're not obeying you. And there's the whole thing about children obey their parents in the Lord. Like, God talks about that numerous times. So it is not their job to be convinced. It is their job to obey. And when we put them in the position of listening to our arguments and answering questions and thinking about it and deciding on their own what they want to do, we're actually not giving them a chance to obey the Lord by obeying our command. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay, so what really should happen? Here are some of my thoughts. Parents should establish authority. Whether the parent is training or teaching, he or she is the authority. So as the role slides from training to teaching, because at first you're totally training, at the end of your parenting with this child, you're totally teaching, and it slides very smoothly from totally one to totally the other, incorporating both almost the entire time. The authority doesn't slide, it doesn't change. So as the child grows and is given more and more responsibility, the parent actually retains the authority. And let me not confuse you, it looks very different. When you're totally training a child and you have the authority, that's when they're really little and you say no. And they have to obey right away. If they do something wrong, they get a consequence. That should look totally different than when you're talking about an 11 or 12 or 13-year-old. You're still the authority, but at that point, you are discussing things with them. You are convincing them. But there's still a balance to keep. So I hope this isn't too confusing. Secondly, kids need to learn to obey. Whether they're 0 or 1 or 2, they do not have the experience or the skills to make life decisions on their own. That's the key time to get things in order as far as authority goes, because it's so clear at that point. It's just pretty easy. They need to obey right away, and they can insert their opinions only after they've complied. So like with our little people, I want to hear what they have to say about things as they're growing older and have opinions, but only after they've shown that they have the ability and the habit of obeying. Because before that, it might be a trick to just get out of it or to try to manipulate me. I need to see that they have a heart pattern that's pretty good, and then they can absolutely bring things to me. Even at that point, though, they have to be in the act of obeying. They need to start out with a posture of compliance and obedience and cheerfulness toward the task. They don't have to be smiling or laughing, but they have to be willing and willing to do it, moving in that direction. And they can share concerns with me, and I want to hear them after that. After that point, after they've shown that. And unless it's an emergency, in which point they need to scream and be as rude as they possibly can, because it's not rude at that point. They need to not be asking questions before they've tried to obey. As a kid grows, the idea is that they're learning more and more about how to make wise decisions, but they can only question and discuss after they've shown they're obeying with a good attitude. So that's what I just said. I'm repeating myself. The parents retain their authority by granting certain decisions or sets of decisions to the child. So holding the authority doesn't mean that we continue to make every decision for the child. That should gradually transition. And here I'm saying it right now. By the time the child graduates from their parenting, all decisions should be granted to the child. The parent is the teaching authority, but this is mainly expressed through honor or asking through advice. Let me just tell you how I do it wrong, because I still fall prey to this one when they get older. Less when they're younger, because the whole patience thing, but more when my kids get older. I don't do a great job with this, so I'm always working on it. Let me just read you what I wrote down. So I fall victim to this trap, especially when children are somewhat older, like I said. And at this point in my parenting, I'm mostly done training with that particular child, and I'm mostly taking the role of a teacher. So this is when it gets harder for me. Plus, I think they're smart. I know a lot of my kids, maybe all of them, are smarter than I am, and I know that. So I'll issue a command, and one in particular will respond with reasons that that's not the best decision. Well, a lot of the time she's right. So I take into account her input and change the decision. And that's all good. I should do that. But that's not the wrong thing. Let me tell you the wrong thing. Any good authority will listen and not be proud by claiming infallibility, and will try to take the best course, right? But I began giving commands as if they were suggestions, and then automatically complying with this child's ideas. So I stopped actually weighing and deciding, but rather just saying something and then going along with her ideas instead every single time. So can you see what's wrong with what I was doing, and still do a lot, sometimes. This is a tough balance to remember who's the parent and still listen to the wisdom of the child, but it can be done. And that wasn't it. Like what I just described to you, what I did, that was not it. I had to tell myself that she is smart, she does have good input, but that her heart needs to be ready to obey when I am giving this command, and that I'm not bound to go with her opinion. Like, she actually is not the parent. And I am not only allowed to disagree, I am supposed to think through whatever input she's giving me and make the decision on my own. I shouldn't burden her with that. That mantle should not fall upon her. It's too heavy for her. So I need to retain that and then take responsibility for that decision as well afterward. And I think when I'm being mushy like this and just doing whatever she's saying because she's usually right, if something were to go wrong with that decision, I would feel like, well, you're the one who made, like, that would be totally wrong. If something went wrong, she would feel like that responsibility had fallen on her. And that's not a good position for her to be in. She's not actually the authority, and she shouldn't have to carry that weight. So again, I should be listening and I should be talking to her, but she should start out with a position of submission and obedience, unless it goes against a higher authority. We should be communicating, and I should still retain the responsibility of making the decision. As infallible as I am, I never have to pretend like I'm not that. So that's only then, when I have this stuff in balance, can I humbly lead instead of letting her take on, like I said, the mantle is too heavy for her. I'm still the authority as I grant her greater and greater responsibility and as I become more of the teacher. So that's what it looks like when I have trouble, and that's when the kids are older. So let me go through what this looks like when they're medium and what it looks like when they're small. So when kids are medium, I don't know what that age that is. What would that be? 6 to 10, I don't know, medium kids. It's a little more clear, but it can still be difficult because my role is constantly moving from the more training to the more teaching. It's shifting all the time. So if I tell a child to accomplish a task, so this is a medium child, telling them to do something, she needs to go quickly, cheerfully, and do it completely right then. Like, that's obedience. If she has concerns or questions, she may communicate those after she's expressed and demonstrated an intention to obey either way. So obviously this wouldn't apply in an emergency, like I talked about before. Obviously, every time I want the kids to scream and stop, whatever needs to happen, needs to happen. So that's not what I'm talking about. But for the most part, if they have a normal concern that's not an emergency, they need to show that they're willing to obey, ready, moving in that direction, and then they can share that concern. If I allow her to question first, before she decides whether or not she's going to do it, like that quote talks about, I am no longer the authority. Like, we're a committee at that point. And if I allow her to wait for complete satisfaction before taking the action, then the committee isn't even the authority. She's the authority. Again, this isn't about being right all the time. That's not what we're talking about. It's about acknowledging authority. And I'm still the authority as I transition from mainly training to mainly teaching. So does that make sense? Again, children are to obey their parents in the Lord. So they are checking between the authority of the Lord and the authority of parents more and more as they get older. Not at all at first, and then more and more and more and more. So that as adults, they're holding that responsibility of checking the two authorities. But at the same time, they need to submit to the authorities unless there's a reason not to. So let's look at the last thing is when the children are the littlest, and that's when it's the most straightforward. And I think if we get it right there, maybe we can ride a little bit. We shouldn't ride, but you do get a lot of traction. If we parent well when kids are little, we get a lot out of that. Like, if we just do our best to really obey God and glorify Him every minute when we're with our kids and when we're around them, when we're praying about them when they're little, and we really instill obedience as much as we can, which of course we're never in charge of their hearts, we get a lot out of it because then God blesses that. Like, it puts them in a position to be able to thrive the rest of their life. And of course, there's always going to be issues to deal with, but you're just in a better position to start out there, So let me cover that last part. So when children are little, it's the easiest time to get the authority really clear. And if you have little kids, that's great. Like, do it now. Because my role is really 100% training at first, we can establish that I'm the authority right away. They're actually allowed no questions or input when they're teeny and very little. Now, those things are legitimate later, and they do not take authority away from the parent, but they can confuse. So it's just so clear. Like, you can't ask me and you can't say no to me right now because you definitely don't know anything yet. You're just really little or you're kind of little and you do know some stuff, but you really still can't question me at all yet. That's very, very clear when you're looking at a little toddler. At first, I don't even have to deal with that. So it's so clear, like I just said. So when I tell the child to do something, she needs to obey immediately. No questions, no input. Again, I don't stop and discuss heat transfer and the chemical makeup of a fireplace door with a 1-year-old who's reaching for hot. I don't have to explain. It's not my role to explain at that point. It's my role to protect the little baby hand from the very hot surface. That sort of thing. That's how we know it's just 100% training at that point. As they get older, I think it's pretty good to teach them about fire and heat transfer and different materials and how they transfer more or less heat, the speed of it, all that. I think that's very good. But again, you don't start that at first. So that's why authority is so much really more straightforward at that point. So I hope that that's helpful. A very rotten way to establish authority, I just want to make sure I've made this clear, would be to just exclusively train and be not unopen, to be completely closed to questioning all the way through parenting. If that's what you think is authority, then that I would totally disagree. I don't think that's what a good authority looks like. And I hope I've made that clear as I've talked about this. But the idea of talking a child into doing the right thing is a bad place to start. It's a bad way to parent. Even when they're older, even when you're almost done parenting, it gets close at that point. But I still think you say, I think you need to do this, or would you please do this? And then as they're questioning and wondering, you are talking with them, you're giving them reasons, and you're convincing them that the right thing is the right thing. Yes, but you're doing that from a position of, I want you to choose this. I'm still in charge. I'm still in charge of you. I'm still protecting you. I'm still taking care of you. I do want you to learn to do the right thing. Here's why I think these things are really good, and you're going to want to make this decision. That's way more appropriate at that point, still from the position of an authority. Okay, if I had somebody here to ask me what I'm talking about, I'd know where I wasn't clear, but since I'm just talking to myself, I'm not sure. So let me just try to end by wrapping up one more time, repeating. When you're asking a kid to think on their own whether or not they think something's a good idea and should do it, and then decide, that's not giving them the opportunity to obey. And that's the huge responsibility of little and medium children, is to learn to obey their father and mother, to obey their parents in the Lord. That's what they need to learn. That's what God has given us as their main assignment. And so if we instead ask them to be their own authority, we are advocating our job before God, and we are robbing them of the opportunity to learn to obey, which is the basic life skill that they need in order to live really good lives. There's also, others, eating, breathing, all that. But obeying is huge. So I just hope that we can all watch out for that and not be putting our children in the place of authority that we should be in, that we should be able to be loving and humble and patient and kind while keeping the positions that God wants us to be in order to bless our kids, protect them, and guide them, rather than stress them out, spoil them, and destroy their character. All right. Well, those were my deep thoughts for today. I will be more practical later, but I hope that made sense. And thank you for being here. I'll see you next Wednesday.